Pranams. What a joy to be with all of you again, especially after our long meditation together this morning in this hall, and then subsequently the many more hours of meditation that so many of you have participated in with heart and soul throughout this day. God bless you. It's a joy to be with you, and also to have the many, many members of our worldwide spiritual family joining us for this program via the live video stream. So welcome to you all. Jai Guru. The topic for tonight was announced as meditation, the path to divine bliss and abundance. And I really don't need to give this talk because we can just take the camera and turn it around that way. And I think if everyone could see the faces that I can see right now, yes, see that light of divine bliss and inner fulfillment, inner abundance. What more do we need to say? You're also wonderfully in tune with the goals and ideals that our Guru came to spread to the human family worldwide. So I'd like to begin with a prayer, if you'll join in with me, a prayer that's also an affirmation and a invocation of the Guru's blessings on this process of discovery of the path of divine bliss and abundance. So let us turn our consciousness within, feel the presence of the divine, and let us pray. Heavenly Father, Mother, friend, beloved God, Bhagavan Krishna, Jesus Christ, Mahavatar Babaji, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswarji, our Gurudev Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, we bow to you all. Divine Guru, teach us to dwell in an inner sanctuary of boundless peace and joy, continuously supplied from the inexhaustible divine abundance. You have blessed us with the tools and wisdom to maintain that sanctuary in our souls. No matter what troubles or difficulties we encounter in the outer world, inspire in us the enthusiasm, will, and determination to use those divine tools and methods. And may our efforts be infused with your ceaseless wisdom and blessings to create a life of joy and peace, of inner and outer abundance. Beloved God, make us realize we are your divine children, made in your image of immortal joy, wisdom, and the power to be divinely victorious in life. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Well, dear friends, it's such a joy to be back in India these last few weeks after a 2-year absence. Wonderful to see so many of the dear and devoted followers of this Kriya Yoga path, and not just to be together with you all in a physical sense, but to be together in this spiritual sanctuary of the teachings of Kriya Yoga that have been bestowed upon each of us by our enlightened lineage of gurus. We can think of that sanctuary as Kriya Yoga Sharanam, a refuge, a shelter that will restore, whenever we need to, restore that connection between our soul, our outer consciousness, and the presence of God constantly there for us. We have access to that Kriya Yoga Sharanam, that sanctuary, that shelter, that spiritual refuge, not as a physical temple or a building that's been constructed by human hands, but as a sanctuary of spiritual consciousness. One that we can enter, as I said, at any time by attuning our consciousness, our minds, our will, our sense of purpose on this earth, to the ceaseless flow of blessings imparted by our Guru and Param Gurus on occasions such as this. So again, welcome to all of you, and welcome to the thousands joining by live stream video link from around the world. Let's launch into the subject together. I think more than anything else, the message that I want to share with all of you, that I want to impress on all of you, is just this, very simply, to convey to you the tremendous love that our Guru and Param Gurus have for each one of you who is following this path. Tremendous, unceasing love and blessings. They know that the hope of this world is in souls like you. Souls who are mobilizing their conscious power of will, the focused power of initiative, to live the spiritual life, to live the divine teachings and techniques that have been imparted to this modern world from India's highest ages of spiritual civilization by this lineage of Kriya Yoga gurus behind this path. That's why often when I meet with devotees, I repeatedly remind each of you of your great responsibility as followers of this path, the responsibility to make yourselves a living link between India's golden age of spiritual civilization and the coming modern global civilization of our time. And the SRF, YSS teachings are the very embodiment of the way to do that. Since I introduced this concept and brought up this phrase over the past few years, sometimes people have asked me, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to be a living link? To be a living link with that treasure that India has preserved, that Sanatana Dharma, eternal science of spirituality. What does it mean to be a living link with that divine heritage? I want everyone here to understand, very simple, our gurus and others that honor that tradition, but our gurus with the techniques of Kriya Yoga from those higher ages, they are that living link. They are that living link. So we don't have to feel that we need to wade through deep waters of ancient texts or difficult philosophies and so on. We just have to link the YSS SRF teachings with our daily lives. To link that way of life, that way of balanced spiritual living with our own daily lives. Then automatically we are linked with that golden age of India's ancient spiritual civilization. Sanatana Dharma, the eternal science of truth. I know I don't need to tell anyone of you this, but clearly at this time the conditions in our world are unsettled, gravely unsettled at the present time. In nations all around the world, we see old patterns are being challenged and broken up and disrupted, and often in a seemingly chaotic way, isn't it? Social patterns, political patterns, patterns of moral and religious belief. And sometimes it's easy to succumb to a sense of insecurity, a sense of even fear or discouragement, if one has no vision of an underlying pattern, an underlying process that is actually guiding and governing what seems to mortal consciousness as a chaotic process. Again and again, I want to remind you that followers of this path, those who align their daily lives with the teachings and techniques brought by our lineage of gurus, they have access to the underlying divine plan. They have access to that vision of what our world is evolving into. Take a moment and think about that. And it's a good thing to remind oneself whenever reading the news or looking at the headlines or social media or news feed online, and there tends to be a little ruffling of the consciousness, a little insecurity. We have to remember what our Guru and Param Gurus have brought is a pattern of living that is ideally suited, ideally positioned to become the basis for a higher age of civilization in our modern world. We find in YSS and SRF lessons many, many resources, many places that we can go to understand more deeply, to find that reassurance. There's lessons such as becoming an ideal world citizen. Another one is spirituality for the new ascending age, what the universal religion of ancient India can teach us. In lessons like this, in the teachings of our Guru, we do have a clear roadmap and guide to navigate through what seems to be a chaotic process that the world at large is going into. But the main point I want to make about this is one, that by practice of the How to Live teachings of Paramahansa Yoganandaji, which really in this world we can say they're not just how to live teachings, they're how to survive teachings. By following those, we can contribute to the quickening of our own personal spiritual evolution and to the evolution of a better world at the same time. Let me explain a little more about that. When, in the course of upward progress of civilization, when societies go through temporary periods of instability, when things seem to be falling apart, this is a natural process of the cycles of civilization, the evolution of human consciousness and human society. What we need to know and what we have the assurance of from our gurus is that behind that process, there is a subtle force of spiritual evolution and a force of upward evolution that ensures that the arc of human progress can continually reform itself into new patterns, better patterns, more divine patterns. So it's up to us. It's up to us who are living on this planet today to ask and to participate in the process of determining what will those patterns look like? What will the new world that's coming look like? And again, the answer, if we look in the right place, is so clear and so simple, and it's simply that India's ancient Sanatana Dharma supplies the ideal pattern for the coming global civilization. India's Sanatana Dharma supplies the ideal pattern for the coming global civilization. And as we know through conscientious practice of the Kriya Yoga teachings of Paramahansaji and his lineage of gurus, each one of us can help to influence the course of events so that as the old social patterns and political and moral and even religious patterns that society has been accustomed to for centuries, as they continue to break apart, and they will continue to break apart, they can be replaced. They will be replaced by new patterns that are more conducive to harmony with the divine law, to harmony with the higher consciousness of awakened spiritual potentials on this earth. I want to read to you a very timely statement of our guru. He was so foresighted. He saw the pattern of what the world was going to and was actually given, part of his mission was to bring this way of life, this set of teachings that are embodied in the Kriya Yoga science of meditation and balanced spiritual living. Part of his mission was to ensure that those methods and those tools would be ready. So here's what he said 70 years ago, imagine, 70 years ago, he said, "Never in world history was it more necessary than now to follow the path of spirituality. From the frightful specter of world war, we see that technology and inventions must not outpace spiritual development. Technology must not outpace spiritual development." But he went on and said, "The world is marching on, progressing and evolving no matter what happens." Again, referring to that cycle of upward evolution, that we are in an ascending age. We will continue to evolve upward. And he says, "We are living in strange times, and we have great opportunities if we would but take them." You know, Guruji was a great advocate for the benefits of modern science, modern technology as aids for human welfare. But he also pointed out that material science, the advance of material science, is based on an understanding of laws that govern the material world. We also have to have understanding, we also have to have awareness and the ability to apply higher laws that govern the realms of consciousness, the realms of spirit. So he went on in that same statement and said, "All over the world, different nations have contributed to different phases of civilization. India's contribution is spiritual knowledge." India's contribution is spiritual knowledge. He said, "Truth is universal and can be found in the esoteric traditions of all the great religions. But in India, more than any other nation, has kept alive the highest truths and methods of God realization that were lost to humanity at large during the Dark Ages. Those truths and techniques, Guruji says, are being given worldwide for the first time in this modern era in the Self-Realization Fellowship Yogoda Satsanga lessons. I often feel that my only real responsibility, my only real role when I come before groups such as you all is simply to remind us all of what we have been given, the amazing spiritual treasure that we have been given, and then together to help each other kindle our enthusiasm to embrace and to apply and to plumb the depths of that spiritual treasure. Because those truths and techniques that Guruji is referring to, when he says, India, more than any other nation, has kept alive the highest truth and methods of God realization, and those truths and techniques are being given worldwide for the first time in this modern era to all of you, to all who follow this lineage of gurus. And those truths and techniques, my dear ones, they are a spiritual dynamo. They are a powerhouse that will infuse every aspect of our lives with joy, with success, with peace. And maybe most important, with a sense of deep, deep inner reassurance that we are living according to the divine plan and fulfilling the purpose for which we are here on earth. So many people feel adrift in modern life simply because they have lost sight or they never had a sense of what the purpose for which they are here on earth. What is the purpose of life? Again and again, Guruji tells us the goal of life is self-realization. To regain the consciousness of our immortal self, the soul, one with the infinite spirit, our true being, our true immortal and essential self. And that essential being is divine. That is the purpose of life, to have that realization and gradually have it unfold in our lives into a continuous awareness, a continuous fountain, a continuous wellspring from which we can draw in real time what we need to maintain our dynamic and living connection with the divine. Guruji gave such a beautiful and powerful description of what our real self is, what a soul is. He says, souls are radiating rays of spirit, one with the eternal. Think about that. Think about that. There's that infinite, eternal, all-perfect receptacle and bestower of infinite joy, infinite love, infinite power. And out of that spirit, the souls of each one of us is a radiating ray. We can never be separated. We can never be apart from that being. We can never be away from, unless we permit, we can never be away from that source of infinite beauty, infinite ability, infinite unconditional love. And when we know ourselves in that way, as Guruji is doing his best to teach us and holding us by the hand as we advance step by step, month by month, year after year, in the practice of meditation, as we advance toward that consciousness, then we know even in our outer life, even in the material world, we have that connection. We have that dynamic connection with our divine source. I want to go into some of the principles and some of the techniques and insights that Guruji gave for achieving this. Earlier, a little while ago, I was talking about making ourselves living links with the living power, the divine power of India's Sanatana Dharma, and with the enlightened gurus of modern times who guide our path. Here's one way in which we can become that kind of link. I want you just to think, just follow along with this analogy for a while. I think you'll find it helpful and useful. I certainly have. One kind of living link that we see all around us on earth is in the plant kingdom. Plants and trees and flowers. They are living links between the sunlight, and life on earth. You know that. That's basic material science. And how do they do that? They do that by a process that we know as photosynthesis. Photosynthesis. In other words, taking the light of the sun and converting that into chemical energy to sustain themselves. So, similarly, one aspect of each of us being a living link is to practice what we could call spiritual photosynthesis, or what we might call yoga synthesis. We'll get back to that in a minute. But, think about what that humble little flower, that humble little plant does. It takes the visible light of the sun and, as I said, converts it into energy that feeds itself, and then by extension feeds the entire animal kingdom and the human race as well. When you think about this, how astoundingly miraculous is this method by which the Divine Mother continuously feeds and nourishes all of her children through her light. But as miraculous as that is, even more as human beings, we are equipped to perform an even greater miracle. We can call it the miracle of Brahma synthesis. Just as photosynthesis converts light into chemical energy to nourish the plant, devotees of this path can perform a different kind, yoga synthesis or Brahma synthesis, to convert the grace and power of God into right action, to nourish the soul and the entire world in which we live. To convert the grace and power of God into right action, to nourish the soul and the entire world in which it lives. Again, to follow the analogy, just as a plant performs that process of photosynthesis by turning its leaves and its flowers toward the sun, so we perform that spiritual photosynthesis by turning our consciousness wholeheartedly, continuously, enthusiastically toward God. In a very simple way, that is the essence of the path that our Guru has brought to us. That is the essence of the techniques that he has brought to us, to enable us to continually turn our consciousness to receive that grace and power and spiritual enlightenment from God. We find this explained to us in perfect clarity, in all the detail and ease of practice in those lessons that Guruji has made for us, especially in the meditation techniques of the Kriya Yoga science. Are you following along the analogy with again, just take it a little further, that we see how plants and flowers, they take light and transform it into all kinds of different substances, benefits, not only for themselves, but for the environment in which they live. Some plants, through that process, convert the light into nutritional qualities. Some create medicinal or healing properties. Some produce beauty. Some produce fragrance. Some produce other kinds of materials for useful purposes. All of these are a result of that that process of photosynthesis, of that receiving and converting of light. Well, my dears, the yogis, all of you, all of us, we can use spiritual photosynthesis in the same way to produce an abundance and diversity of soul qualities that benefit ourselves and also the environment, the world in which we live. And again, this is one of the how to live arts in the YSSRF lessons, especially those that impart the techniques of the Kriya Yoga science. This idea of receiving the light, receiving the grace, receiving the power of God, this is throughout the lessons, throughout the teachings of our Guru. He didn't use this word of spiritual photosynthesis, but he gave so many beautiful word pictures or word illustrations that show us how to do this. Let's do one together. Let's practice this together. You all have heard this before from Whispers from Eternity, but this is an affirmation and a prayer that each of us can use to experience and to understand how we maintain that divine connection and what it means for our personal lives and for the world in which we live. So close your eyes and just listen as I read this beautiful invocation of Guruji to describe this process that we're discussing. Guruji says in his prayer at dawn and the opening of lotus buds, my soul flower softly unfolds to receive thy light. Each petal is bathed in rays of bliss. The early breezes waft the perfume of thy presence. Here he's describing our morning meditation, of course. Then he prays, bless me, that with thee spreading aurora, I spread to all men thy message of love. With the awakening day, may I awaken countless souls with my own and bring them to thee. In these kinds of beautiful word pictures, Guruji makes it so vivid for us, doesn't he? He makes it so easy to picture how we can be those living links. And just like the humble plant, the beautiful flowers, the trees, and other plant life that we see around us are constantly, naturally being that link between sunlight and life on earth, so we, as we awaken it through Kriya Yoga, as we awaken our consciousness of our spiritual nature, we can be those living links between the grace and power of God, to receive it, to convert it into soul qualities, as Guruji says, that will awaken countless souls with my own and bring them to thee. One time Guruji said, again, pertinent to this idea of what the role of spirituality, what the role of the Kriya Yogi, the follower of the YSS and SRF path is in today's world. That path that's 100% focused, 100% grounded on establishing that living connection with the divine source, and then maintaining it as we conduct our lives in the world through meditation, through that connection with the divine. So Guruji tells us in that connection, he says, as soon as you feel God in your heart, you will contribute to world civilization as no king or politician has ever done before. As soon as you feel God in your heart, you will contribute to world civilization as no king or politician has ever done before. So remember, what Guruji has given us throughout his teachings, particularly in the lessons, particularly in the techniques of meditation, is this conscious power to receive the grace of God and to use that process of spiritual photosynthesis, we might say, to produce an abundance of soul qualities for our own benefit and also for the benefit of the environment and the world in which we live. Again, Guruji went on with that same analogy. He said, this is from one of his talks that will go into a forthcoming edition of a forthcoming volume of his collected talks and essays. He says to each of us, be like a flower, be like a flower. Look at the flowers, he said. They know nothing of criticism. They just attract you by their beauty and their fragrance, and you love them. Each one of you is a psychological flower. People will like you if you exude the perfume of soul qualities. And he concludes, wherever you go, be a beautiful soul flower, attractive to all humanity. As we know, the plant kingdom, that process of deriving nourishment, deriving energy from the sunlight, that goes on through any kind of clouds, through any kind of air pollution, through any kind of impurities in the atmosphere. Still, that plant is able to receive and convert that light, that physical light. Likewise, we have to remember the soul. The soul can absorb the wisdom. Soul can absorb spiritual grace, spiritual power, spiritual inspiration from all circumstances, in all circumstances, whether it's good or bad, difficult or pleasant, if we have our attitudes tuned in the right way, if we practice that essential art of right attitude. That's why Guruji taught us to pray, whatever conditions confront me, I know that they represent the next step in my unfoldment. I will welcome all tests because I know that within me is the intelligence to understand and the power to overcome. Whatever conditions we find ourselves in, if we go within and realign our attitudes, realign our spiritual receptivity, close the eyes, look into the Kutastha center, into the spiritual eye, and just feel that downpour of spiritual light, that downpour of spiritual understanding and strength and inspiration and guidance, and realign the attitudes, realign the actions with that principle that Guruji has given. Whatever conditions confront me, I know that they represent the next step in my spiritual unfoldment. I will welcome all tests because I know that within me is the intelligence to understand and the power to overcome. We've been talking about the YSS SRF lessons. And I think most of you know that those lessons come with an app that can be used on mobile devices to access the lessons, to read them, to study them, to have them with us at all times. Who has that app on their mobile device? That's it. Wonderful. I always loved this, what I heard not too long ago, story that was told to me by a devotee in New York City, and a longtime follower of this path. And he said when he encounters in his professional life people who are curious about what he's doing in terms of his own spiritual path, spiritual practice, he says sometimes he'll just pull out his mobile device and open the app and scroll to the list of contents of the lessons and just hand it to the person to read. And so then the person sees on the screen things like how to know God, the art of balanced spiritual living, prosperity and success, spiritual methods of health and healing, yoga methods of diet, control of emotions, how to increase your energy and rejuvenate your body, spiritualizing your relationships with others, becoming an ideal world citizen. You know, just reading that list of contents on the app. And then he said most of the time people will say, oh, I had no idea. Where can I find this? Where do I go to receive this? Again, what a tremendous resource, what a tremendous treasure house of spiritual wisdom, spiritual inspiration each of us has been given. You know, in the tech world nowadays, when there's a task to be accomplished or job to be done, we often hear that phrase, oh, there's an app for that. There's an app for that, right? Well, I like to say, no matter what challenge is before us, what situation or difficulty we may find ourselves in, there's a lesson for that. There's a lesson for that. Guruji has given us so much that whatever happens to us, there's a lesson for guiding and encouraging us and showing us the way through any difficult circumstance that we might encounter. So that's one thing that I hope we'll all take a renewed appreciation for. No matter what comes in our lives, my dear ones, just remember, my Guru has given me the key to, number one, understanding this, and number two, overcoming it if it's a difficulty. There's a lesson for that. Now, as enjoyable as it may be to hear that, there's a deeper side even to that I want to touch on. See how I can explain this. It's that the lessons, the instructions, the inspiration, and the guidance that we get through those lessons, these are outer expressions of what already lies within our inmost being. You know, earlier I was saying how Guruji described what our real self is, radiating ray of spirit. In other words, continuously connected with that infinite powerhouse, that infinite dynamo of all creativity, all power, all joy, all wisdom, everything that we need to live in this world as spiritual beings. So the lessons are just an outer pointer to what already lies within us. They're a pointer to the powers that lie latent in the spiritual centers in our spine and brain that are awaiting the awakening touch of our meditative consciousness. The lessons are a pointer to the powers in our cerebrospinal centers, those powers of the soul that are just awaiting the awakening touch of our meditative consciousness. So when we say, oh, there's an app for that, or there's a lesson for that, in a spiritual sense, in a deeper sense, we can revise that to say, whatever conditions confront me, there's a spiritual power for that in my higher consciousness. There's a subtle energy for that in one of my 7 chakras, cerebrospinal centers, awaiting for me to deploy it at need. Imagine what we have been given as Kriya Yogi practitioners. Imagine what, and appreciate, and most of all, use what we have been given. There's a power in the spinal centers for anything that we can be confronted with. In those centers, as Guruji has explained, we find what? power for dharmic action, power to resist evil, to resist degrading and tamasic vibrations we may encounter in the environment, power of love, power of forgiveness, power of calmness and intuition, power of will to accomplish, power of controlling the life forces in the body for rejuvenation and well-being, power of self-control. It goes on and on, more and more. Everything we need is there. It's just for us to actualize, to activate, to access those potentials and bring them into practice, bring them into manifestation and expression in our daily lives. How do we do that? You all know the answer. We do that by patient daily practice of the Kriya Yoga Pranayama and awakening of the higher faculties of consciousness. Patient daily practice of the techniques of the Kriya Yoga science. We should stop from time to time and just realize how completely 180-degree reorientation of our being takes place the further we go along this path. Where we started perhaps completely captivated or victimized by what comes to us from the outer world, made fearful, made insecure, bewildered, not understanding what are we here for, what are we meant to achieve in life. 180 degrees the other way, we are transformed into beings that, as Guruji says, no matter what comes to us, in real time, we are able to pull from that divine fountain, those divine centers of life and consciousness, and bring forth the how to live, the how to survive spiritual skills we need in daily life. That's what Kriya Yoga meditation does. Well, my dear ones, if I could just sum up, if I could just convey how much Guruji wants each of you to become a real Kriya Yogi. There's nothing higher, there's nothing more beneficial, not only for yourselves, but for the world at large. Become a real Kriya Yogi to experience those powers, to experience those gifts, to experience that grace and flow of divine consciousness that is our birthright as souls. I urge each one of you who has learned the techniques of Kriya Yoga, take some time to review, take some time to reread and understand, make sure that you really know what it means to practice Kriya Yoga. You really pay attention to the details, to each aspect of the technique, and you'll find what I'm talking about is not just theory, it's not just abstract philosophy. That practice gives access to those divine dynamos that we can draw whatever we need through that process of attunement, through that process of connection. You know, after we practice the Kriya technique, for instance, in that state of interiorized silence, Guruji encourages us to just go up and down the spine, isn't it? Go up and down the spine, chanting Om at each of the centers, being aware, being attentive, aligning our consciousness with those energies and those outpourings of divine consciousness. Go up and down the spine, chanting Om and feeling those chakras, those spiritual centers. In one of the lessons, Guruji says, an amazing statement, amazingly powerful description of what that process is bringing about. He said, plug into the negative socket of each center. You know, just like on a wall socket, you have a plug. You plug it into the socket and then makes the lights go on in your lamp. He says, same way, plug into the negative socket of each center with your positive attention, with your focused attention, and switch on those power thrones of God. Plug into the negative socket of each center with your positive attention and switch on those power thrones of God. Divine powers and realizations await you. We return to the topic of meditation, the way to divine bliss and abundance. I think now we can all just be re-inspired by the simplicity of what Guruji has given us. Daily meditation, daily reforming or reestablishing that connection with the soul and the soul's connection with God. And then to live in this world, as he said, as a spiritual lotus, a beautiful spiritual flower, exuding those soul qualities to all who cross our path. By doing this, not only will we be benefiting ourselves, supremely benefiting ourselves, but we will be creating that life filled with divine bliss and abundance. And we will be contributing in the highest way to the coming higher age of human civilization, higher consciousness that is the foremost need of our emerging global civilization. Jai Guru.